Good morning, everyone. Boker Tov, and welcome to Tanya and You Chapter 40. We are already at Chapter 40. Quite the journey. 40 chapters of Tanya we've been covering on Thursday mornings over here. And this is another fascinating chapter as we conclude a conversation that we've been having for a number of chapters. But to start with a little a story, actually, I think it's a true story where there was a great rabbi who was fundraising for his yeshiva, and there's this known philanthropist, a very very well off, wealthy Jewish man that he thought that perhaps he could be the right person to meet and to solicit for the yeshiva. So, after lots of trials and tribulations, eventually he makes it to this wealthy man's, this philanthropist's house, and he's sitting, waiting for him to come out of his study. And finally, he comes out, and he's sitting there, and he's looking at a picture. He doesn't say a word. So the philanthropist asks the rabbi, "How could I help you?" He says, "This picture over here. Who is this picture? Who is in this picture? Who is this man?" He says, "Oh, this is my late father. Oh, what a wonderful person he was. This is my late father." He says, "Oh, a picture like this would be a perfect centerpiece in our yeshiva library. If we could just get this picture to put it in our library, that would be great." And the philanthropist says, "That's amazing. Sure, I'll get you a picture just like this. Is that all you need?" He said, "Yes, but now we need a library." And for that, we need you to help. Okay, so we've been talking a lot about the action and the intent, the kavana, the passion behind the action, right? And just to kind of, you know, uh, the idea that we've been mentioning over the last few chapters is that although we time and again we can't emphasize this enough, that in Judaism we emphasize action. The act is what's most important. However, the act is a dry act without the life behind it. We use the analogy of like a body without a soul. The body is complete, has complete with all its organs. It's complete, but it's lifeless. So the mitzvah without the kavanah, without the passion behind it, is a lifeless mitzvah. But it's a mitzvah nonetheless. However, we want to imbue it with a passion to bring some life, bring some life to it. But then we started talking about, and last week already, that the importance of doing the mitzvah with this passion is not only for ourselves, that we're more into it, and the act is such a different act, right? Like we said, the analogy of giving, let's say, giving charity to someone, where you do it, where you kind of throw the money there in their face, here, take it. At the end of the day, the poor person has money to buy food, and their life is saved. So you save the life. But if you do it in that manner, it's so dry, it's so distasteful. But if you do it with a smile, you do it with an excitement, you make the person feel good. It elevates the act. It's such a different type of act. It brings life to the act. And the same is true in all of our mitzvahs with Hashem. So we started talking about like this metaphysical effect that our mitzvah has, almost like from the opposite side, from the opposite perspective. You ever see those like when I was a kid, we used to go to this like children's museum where you had like this one-sided mirror where you come at the beginning of this, the path that takes you through this museum, and it looks like a mirror, and they had the big sign, make, these funny faces in the mirror, and everyone's sitting there making these funny faces, and then towards the end of this windy path, you kind of come to the other side of the mirror, and over there it's a window, so you actually see everyone's, what everyone's doing. So it's a one-sided mirror. So we we only live in our reality, and we see what we see, what we're able to observe, and that is the way we see life. But Kabbalah tells us that there's this like the whole different reality, the more spiritual reality, which in fact our world is really a mirror image of that true reality. Right. What is truly real? It's the spiritual world, the spiritual reality, and it's expressed, it's manifests, it mirrors in our material, physical world. So whatever happens over here is really what's happening above, right? It's really a mirror image of what's happening above. So when we do an action over here, when we do a mitzvah, it's not only, it doesn't start and end with us, but there is this metaphysical, a spiritual reaction or effect of the mitzvah. And we spoke about that when we do a mitzvah, that's a connection with God. That's great. But when we do a mitzvah with the proper passion behind it, we're able to elevate the mitzvah, and it draws down a certain type of spiritual energy in the higher worlds. And depending on what type of passion we have, that is how far up this energy reaches to which type of world in the spiritual world. And why is that important to us today? Well, it's important because that's what, like we said, we're only a mirror image. But also after 120, after a person passes away, then we're going to reap the benefit of what we accomplished here in this world, and that is something that's going to happen, and we're going to appreciate that when our soul goes up to those spiritual worlds. All of the mitzvah that we did today, we're going to kind of see the true light, the true effect that it has in the spiritual worlds. And when we do it with the proper intent, it makes all the difference. They say the story with this tribal leader in India who is coming the winter, and people were coming to him and says, tell us, um, Guru, is it going to be a cold winter or a warm winter? How should we prepare? So he says, it's going to be a cold winter. Okay. So they start going out, they start chopping wood, they start preparing all the firewood. They start insulating their homes. And now the guru is getting a little nervous. Like, really? How do I know how do I know it's going to be a cold winter? So he quickly turns on the weather channel, and he sees that in the weather channel they say it's going to be a very cold winter. Oh, he feels good about it. So the next time his men come to him and say, tell us, what's the winter going to be like? Is it really going to be cold? Oh, it's going to be a very, very cold winter. And they go out, they start chopping even more wood and even more wood. And then he quickly goes and listens to the weather channel, and they say, ooh, it's going to be a very, very cold winter. And then a week or two later, his people come back to him and say, tell us, so what's the winter going to be like? He said, oh, it's going to be a very, very, it's going to be a freezing winter. A winter that we have never seen before. There's going to be snow in New Orleans. It's going to be some type of winter. And they go out, they start chopping even more wood and preparing. They started buying, coats and everything. And he goes quickly to this weather channel to see what's going on. And they say, "Ooh, it's going to be a record-breaking winter. It's going to be so cold." He's like, "Wow, I'm onto something." But he wants to make sure. So he calls the weather channel and he says, "Tell me the truth. How do you know what type of winter it's going to be?" So the people in the weather channel, they say, we'll tell you the truth. We actually don't know. But we see that the tribes in India are cutting a lot of wood. Ah, they're chopping wood. It must be a cold winter. So I thought about that. We're talking about mirror image. The mirror image, right? What we do has an effect above. And that is really the real world, right? So that's what the Tanya over here is talking about, the importance of the passion behind the mitzvah. And we spoke about what happens when we approach the mitzvah, or we approach the Torah study. without the proper intent, without the proper passion. And the term used is shaloi lishma, with not for the proper reasons. So let's develop this for a moment. So you're studying Torah, for example, but with not for the proper reasons. What could that be? That could be studying Torah for personal gain. I enjoy it. It makes me feel good. Perhaps I could show off. Perhaps I could gain respect from others. Oh, this guy, oh, he is knowledgeable in the Torah. You don't want to start up with him, right? Okay, so I gain respect through my Torah study. Uh, Ultimately, the Torah tells us the main thing is study, right? Action is the main thing. But the intent is also important. And therefore, if someone who does the Torah study not for the proper intent, the Tanya says it's no good. It doesn't get elevated. We have to do teshuvah. Sometimes we study Torah just because we're like robotic. We do it day in, day out. We don't have a passion behind it. We just do it, right? There are certain things that come to us once a year. So once a year, it's exciting. Oh, the Seder is coming. We eat matzah, Passover. Oh, we haven't done it for a year. We're going to light the Hanukkah candle the first night of Hanukkah. Oh, it's exciting. But then the things that we do every day. And because it's just routine, so sometimes we lose that passion. Torah study can be the same thing. I'm studying Torah because I study Torah every day. It's on my schedule. It's my routine. I wake up in the morning. I have to open the a chumash and I read a few verses or I read a book. Whatever Torah study I do, I listen to a class. But because it's routine, it loses the passion. So what do we do with that? The Tanya says it's not too late. It's not. You haven't lost. You haven't missed the boat. You haven't lost your opportunity. The next time, the next time you study Torah and you study it for the proper intent, retroactively you're able to elevate all of the Torah studied without the proper intent. In Tanya, one of the signature ideas over here, especially in the earlier chapters in Tanya, was emphasized again and again that the struggle of life is not between good and bad. That's not the struggle. The struggle of life is not what is good and what is bad. The struggle of life is really about selfish and selfless. It's about, am I doing it altruistically for the proper reasons, or am I doing it for myself? And that is the same with Torah study as well. Why am I studying Torah? Am I doing it for myself, or am I doing it for the proper reasons for God? Out of a great love and a desire to have a relationship with God. That is why I'm studying. That has to be our passion. Am I going to gain from it as well? Of course. Is it interesting? Is it mind stimulating? Absolutely. And appreciate it. Appreciate Torah study. But ultimately, our drive, our motivation has to be because this is God's wisdom, and I have to connect and relate to God through His wisdom. That is lishma. That's selfless learning. That's selfless study. And without that, if we're studying Torah just for ourselves, for our personal gain, like we said, it remains heavy. It remains heavy. It doesn't elevate. It doesn't go up. Although the words of Torah are godly, the words of Torah are God's wisdom, and God's wisdom is godly, is divine. But when they missing that life within it, it becomes heavy and dry. It doesn't elevate. And the analogy for this could be, for example, if you have, let's say, a father, okay, or a mother who has two children. One child is 2 years old. The other child is 22 years old. Now, this father is the same father for the 22-year-old and the 20-year-old. Doesn't do anything different. Where in whose mind do we have a greater awareness of the Father? In the 2-year-old or the 22-year-old? I think we say the 22-year-old, right? The 22-year-old is much more aware of who his father is and what it means to be a father and the appreciation for the father and the respect for the father, etc. The 2-year-old probably knows who the father is, but doesn't appreciate it as much, doesn't understand what it means to be a father. So the father is the same father. The father is not concealing himself from the 2-year-old, but the concealment of the revelation of the awareness of the father is there at that concealment is there at the for the 2-year-old just because it's a 2-year-old. So the same is true that Tanya says with the revelation of godliness in this world, where there are certain spaces where godliness is more concealed, not because God is concealed, God is everywhere, but it's because we are not ready to appreciate God in every area. So when we study Torah, godliness is revealed in His Torah. The Torah is God's wisdom. But when we're doing it without the proper passion, we are approaching the Torah with that concealment. We are kind of not allowing the true essence of the words of the Torah to be revealed because we're using it for something antithetical to the Torah, ourselves, our own ego. So in order to allow God's light, God's energy, the divinity of the Torah to shine forth, we have to have the right mindset when we approach the study of Torah. And when we have that proper mindset, we allow the Torah to be in its fullest glory, in its truest sense, which is the divine wisdom, and then it elevates to its source above. And this is what the prophet tells us. Hoi kol tzamei l'chul hamayim, that whoever is thirsty, go drink water. Now, do you need a prophet to tell you that? The prophet tells you, if you're thirsty, drink water. Really, thank you. Now I know what to do. I was wondering, I was so thirsty, I wasn't sure what to do. I have water all around me. I'm sitting in my home. I have a faucet. I have water in the fridge. But I haven't thought of it. I'm thirsty, but I didn't know what to do. Oh, I read the prophets. Now I know that if I'm thirsty, drink water. Of course not, right? So what is the prophet telling us? What is he adding? Just saying the obvious. Hay called samei l'chul hamayim. If you're thirsty, go to water. So some say, okay, what he's referring to is on the spiritual thirst. If you're thirsty for Torah, study Torah, because we know Torah is compared to water. And the prophet is telling us, study Torah if you're thirsty, which also kind of needs an added depth to that, because, okay, of course, if I'm thirsty for Torah, I study Torah. So the Tanya says, this is the end of chapter 40, that what the prophet is telling us is that if you are hoikot sameh, if you are thirsty for godliness, you want to connect with Hashem, you want to connect with God. That's what you're thirsty for. And if you're thirsty for God, and sometimes you're thinking, well, how could I connect with God? How do I connect with God? And for this, he tells us, go study his Torah. In other words, not if I'm thirsty for Torah, study for Torah. If I'm thirsty for God, I want to have a relationship with God, study his Torah. So when I study his Torah, what am I studying it for? For the relationship with God. I find it's so interesting that very often the weekly classes that we give, the Tanya class or the Parsha class, or whichever topic we give on a weekly basis, which we're following chapters, right? I didn't choose to do chapter 40 today. This is where we're up to. We did 39 last week, so we're doing 40 this week. But very often the other classes that we're teaching here at Chabad, like the JLIs or the other ones, end up being very similar topics. I find this very, very often. So for those of you who joined our JLI this week, we spoke about the Talmud, and we spoke about a very similar idea that that our approach to study, we're not only approaching study for the knowledge of the study, which is obviously amazing and important. We should have the knowledge of the Torah in our mind. We know how to live, the guide to life. But the underlying approach has to be for God. I'm doing it because this is how I relate to God. An analogy used is, and it's not a complete analogy, and I'll tell you why in a second, but to kind of have a little bit of appreciation for this. Sometimes you meet someone, and you start small talk. How are you? How was your day? You ever ask someone, how are you? And then they start giving you an hour explanation of how they are. And you're thinking, that's not what I meant. I was just trying to be nice, right? But sometimes you are interested in hearing what they have to say, but you're not really interested in what they're saying. So why do you ask these questions? You're asking these questions because you want to deepen this relationship. You want the person to talk so you can have that connection with the person. What they're saying is only secondary. It's more, I want to hear from you. I want to have a conversation with you about what? About whatever it is. Why? Because the premise and the agenda over here is to get to know the person, to have a relationship with the person. And it's through socializing and dialogue. So when we want to have a relationship with God, we are thirsty. We want meaning in life. We want to connect to something greater than ourselves. We want to connect with God. How is that done? Through studying His Torah. What topic should I study? That's not important at this point. That's secondary. Yeah, you could choose a topic that interests you. Great. But it's not about the topic. It's about, this is God's wisdom. Therefore, I'm studying. I'm studying because I want to connect with God. God puts Himself in His wisdom. His wisdom is what He shares from the great and infinite God. He shares with us a little bit, a taste of His wisdom. So when I study His wisdom, even if it's not applicable to me, it may not even be any interest to me, but this is His wisdom. So when I know God, when I toil in understanding the ideas, what I'm doing is I am connecting with God at that moment. And I mentioned in the class something very fascinating, where the author of the Tanya, if we know the history of his life, a fascinating life, at one point he was imprisoned for 53 days, corresponding to 53 chapters of the Tanya. And while he was in prison, because of someone, it was infighting within the Jewish community. It was a very, very painful story. They accused him of all these things of supporting the Turks and the rebellion against the Russian government. So it also got very theological. They started interrogating him about things that he wrote in the Tanya. And some of the answers were deep Kabbalistic ideas that the Alter Rebbe felt that he can't just respond especially speaking Russian was difficult for him. He couldn't properly articulate these lofty ideas just in conversation with the non-Jewish interrogators.
Yeah.
And therefore he says, I actually want to write these down in Hebrew, and then you could translate it. So he wrote down these long essays in Hebrew, fascinating essays. Later, they were given to translate, which is a story for itself, to make sure that they were translated accurately. Who was going to be the translators, which is a whole story for itself. But we knew about this. We had this tradition. We knew about these essays that he wrote, and that there's the stories behind the translation. But we didn't. But we never saw the essays. They were in the government files in Russia. This is 1799. 200 years later, in the 1990s, Chabad finally was able to get a hold of copies of these of the file of the Alter Rebbe's interrogation, and they had these files, they had these essays from the Alter Rebbe, and they published it. It's amazing. It's amazing to read. It's like a new revelation from the Alter Rebbe that from 200 years later. It was an amazing revelation. So one of the ideas that is mentioned over there, and we mentioned this in the JLI class, is that he refers to the Russian words, which means divine service, and in Russian it's actually like divine prayer service. And he explains that the divine service is including the study of Torah. The study of Torah, which is a fascinating idea because we don't generally approach study of Torah as a divine service.
No, it is.
It's done because I want to, first of all, it's not always done. Some religions, we don't even do it. But it's done because out of curiosity, for inspiration. I want to get my daily inspiration. I'm going to study some Torah. It's obviously for the knowledge of Torah. I should be an educated Jew. I should know my heritage. I should know what it says in my Torah, right? And that's all true. And if that's your motivation, go with it. Because ultimately, like we said, the action is most important. If that's going to get you off the couch and opening a Torah book, so be it. That should be your motivation. But if we want to live an altruistic life and really, really try to incorporate the ideas of the Tanya, even every once in a while, we should take a few moments in the morning to meditate before we study, and we should ask ourselves, why am I studying Torah today? It's a divine service. This is the way I connect to my God, to my Creator, to the God which is unknowable, which is so much greater than us. So that is infinitely above us in every sense. There's no way that our tiny peanut-sized brains should comprehend God. I mean, how is this even possible? Like it's like a cat trying to understand the greatest mathematician. I mean, who are we in comparison to God and His wisdom? And in God's kindness, He shared with us some of His wisdom in the Torah. And therefore, studying it is not out of curiosity. It's not just for the knowledge of it. It's because this is the way that I, as a mortal, finite human being, how I could connect to the infinite. I could connect with God through His Torah. Nothing greater than that. And this is what chapter 40 concludes with. Hoi kol tzamei. You're thirsty. You're thirsty for a relationship with God. Lechu lemayim. Go drink some water. Study some Torah. No matter the topic. This is God's wisdom, and this is how we connect with Him. So this is kind of wraps up a little bit of what we've been speaking about the last few weeks. Then, especially in chapters 38, 39, 40, the importance of the passion, the motivation behind the mitzvah, that although it's the act that matters, it's the study of Torah itself that matters, it's the act of the mitzvah itself that matters, but we don't want it to let it lie lifeless. We want it to be imbued with life. And how is that done? When we're doing it with a proper passion and kavanah. And ultimately, the kavanah has to be to connect with God. I'll leave you with that. Thank you for joining us on this Thursday morning, and I hope to see you next week.
Yes, you will.
Chapter 41.
See you Sunday.
Thank you, Mendel.
Bye-bye. That was great.